Vice Admiral Horatio Nelson, officer of the British Navy, was against the abolition of slavery. In October 2020, in a speech before the Parliament of Barbados, Governor-General Sandra Mason called for a Barbadian head of state and for the Caribbean island to become a republic by November 2021.
The mantle of leadership falls fully to the post-independence generations of Barbadians. It is those generations who must now define how our country and citizens will dominate the world stage, create a new vision, and build Barbados' future. Our national foundation stones have shifted. National and international events demonstrate that we have entered a new era. The old things have passed away. Since independence, we Barbadians have sought constantly to improve our systems of law and governance so as to ensure they best reflect our characteristics and values as a nation. Having attained independence over half a century ago, our country can be in no doubt about its capacity for self-governance. The time has come to fully leave our colonial past behind. Barbadians want a Barbadian head of state. This is the ultimate statement of confidence in who we are and what we are capable of achieving. Hence, Barbados will take the next logical step towards full sovereignty and become a republic by the time we celebrate our 55th anniversary of independence.
On October 21st, 2021, Barbados elected Dame Sandra Mason as its first president, a key step in the preparations to become a republic and remove Britain's Queen Elizabeth II as head of the state of the Caribbean island. In the House of Assembly, 27 of the 30 members voted in favor. Meanwhile, in the Senate, 18 voted in support. On November the 30th, as Barbados celebrated 55 years of independence, it officially prepared to become the world's youngest republic, finally casting off the colonial vestige of the British monarch as head of the state.
It is with a lot of emotion that I come to this podium this morning to speak with you, to share with you, because we too are conscious, all of us, that we are in a process of transition, that the journey has started and continues at a new level. 396 years of a system of government is not 2 years. And it is with that in mind that I am conscious that we have a responsibility as of December 1st, tomorrow, to ensure that our nation moves as one.
On November 30th, the inauguration of Barbados' first president took place in a ceremony attended by heads of state and government and representatives of several nations, and in the presence of the heir to the British throne, Prince Charles. In her first speech as Sandra Mason stressed the move meant the seizure of full sovereignty.
This moment, every Barbadian becomes the living embodiment of the new republic. Whether fair or foul winds come our way, vessel Republic Barbados has set sail on her maiden voyage. May she weather all storms and land our country and citizens safely on the horizons and shores which are ahead of us. In the year 2021, we now turn our vessel's bow towards the new republic. We do this so that we may seize the full substance of our sovereignty. For decades, we have had discourse and debate about the transition of Barbados to a republic. Today, debate and discourse have become action. I was born and grew up in the time of colonialism and witnessed Barbados' produces independence. I am part of the bridge generation from the colonial past to the independent nation to the future of the new republic. Today, I am both proud and humbled.
Thanks to our team for preparing this material, and we'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomun. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
Deep gazes filled with struggles and stories. Struggles that transcend generation. Know the deepest realities through its protagonists on TeleSUR Documentaries. Sunday. Only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back. Brazil concluded 2021 with a record number of in-debt families, according to a recent survey by the National Confederation of Commerce of Goods, Services and Tourism. The study revealed that 3 out of 4 Brazilian families, that is 75.6%, were in debt during the past year, representing the highest percentage since January 2010. Over a quarter of families, 26.1%, are in debt or behind with their bills, and 1 in 10 says they cannot pay their debts. Inflation in Brazil has reached 10.6 percentage points, the highest rate since 2015. Now we address other topics. Germany reported more than 100,000 coronavirus cases in a single day this Wednesday, a new record high. The Robert Koch Institute, the country's disease control agency, also confirmed 239 coronavirus-related fatalities. The number of people who are currently sick with COVID-19 climbed to more than 900,000, a new high in the current fifth wave. The highly contagious Omicron variant has been the driving force behind the new surge in cases. According to the Koch Institute's latest weekly report, the variant accounts for at least 73% of new infections in the country.
I've had 2 contacts over the past week, which have been positive. I'm doing this for myself and for a colleague who is going on a trip soon. It's just to get clarity. I'm doing very well. The kids are fine too, but they were both positive this morning after a rapid test. We are going to officially have that confirmed by a PCR test, with a lot of waiting time. But then they will have to be quarantined for at least 7 or 10 days. That means it will be difficult to work. Working from home and having children at home is not easy.
Romania saw second high day of coronavirus infections on Wednesday, with officials' data showing more than 16,000 new cases. The highest record dates back to October last year, with nearly 19,000 new infections and around 500 deaths in one day. Romania, a European Union country of around 19.5 million, is the bloc's second lowest vaccination nation against COVID-19, with approximately 40% of the population fully vaccinated. Experts blame widespread disinformation, strong distrust of government authorities, and an ineffective national campaign among the reasons for vaccines hesitancy.
There are very few people. It probably has to do with the lack of proper politics of the government. There is not enough mobilization of the population. I can really say why so few people are here. These anti-vaccination influencers. Probably all of these have this effect. People will come whenever they'll see fit, whenever they'll decide, like I did. They will come later, but it's never too late.
The Director General of the World Health Organization has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from ending and expressed concerns that Omicron is once again overstretching health systems.
Omicron continues to sweep the world. Last week, there were more than 18 million reported cases. The number of deaths remains stable for the moment, but we're concerned about the impact Omicron is having on already exhausted health workers and overburdened health systems. In some countries, cases seem to have peaked, which gives hope that the worst of this latest wave is done with, but no country is out of the woods yet. I remain particularly concerned about many countries that have low vaccination rates, as people are many times more at risk of severe illness and death if they're unvaccinated.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR. It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Welcome back. The Israeli regime has demolished the home of another Palestinian family in the occupied East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. The moves comes as Palestinians from their homes and install more Jewish settlers in East Jerusalem as spark international condemnation. Opposition to the impending eviction of other families from the neighborhood in May last year was used by Israel as one of the excuses for its 11-day bombardment of the Gaza Strip. This Wednesday, Israeli police destroyed the homes of the Salihia family, threatened with eviction since 2017. Hundreds of Palestinians face eviction from homes in Sheikh Jarrah and other East Jerusalem neighborhoods. Palestinian Foreign Minister Riyad al-Maliki condemned the destruction of the house of a Palestinian family in East Jerusalem before the UN Security Council.
Its relentless war against the Palestinian people on the ground. Today, before dawn, Israeli forces surrounded and raided the Salhiya family house in Sheikh Jarrah, violently uprooted them from their home, including children, throwing them out in the freezing cold, and arresting several members of the family and supporters before demolishing their homes, leaving behind despair and destruction.
The settlements are a major obstacle to peace. They are illegal under international law. Yet this construction and expansions has continued. Last night, another Palestinian family was evicted from their home in East Jerusalem. All settlement activity, the demolition and evictions must stop.
Now we move on to other topics. During a panel discussion on Monday, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov reiterated that Moscow has no intention of invading Ukraine. Sergei, who led the Russian delegation at the security talks with the United States in Geneva last week, dismissed the Western accusations, stressing that Moscow's deployment of troops in its own territory is a defensive move in the face of the NATO encirclement. He made it clear that Western security guarantees are imperative. Amid the ongoing tensions, the U.S. Secretary of State visited Ukraine on Wednesday to reassure it Western support. Russia has demanded guarantees from the West and that NATO will not expand to Ukraine or the other former Soviet nations.
There is no risk of a larger scale war to start to unfold in Europe or elsewhere. We do not want and will not take any action of aggressive character. We will not attack, strike, invade, quote unquote, whatever, Ukraine. We see the threat of Ukraine becoming ever more integrated in NATO without even acquiring a formal status of a NATO member state. This is something that goes right to the center of Russia's national security interests.
And Russia's government has warned that the delay in the start-up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is affecting the European community. Work on the pipeline that connects Russia, Central and Eastern Europe was completed on September 10th last year. However, the certification for its operation was suspended by Germany's Federal Network Agency and the project remains on hold. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov pointed out that the delay in beginning services is impacting on the European economy and consumers, especially in the face of rising gas prices. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has not ruled out the possibility of taking action against the project in the event that an attack on Ukraine by Russia, thus repeating the Western allegations denied over and over again by Russia. Responding to this, Peskov recalled that Moscow's maneuvers are defensive, counteracting the constant build-up of NATO troops in Ukraine. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.
Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. a reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class, to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers united will prevail. Oh, say, can you see Rome is over? Oh, build a new. 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 Oh, build a new.
Hi, you're watching TeleSUR English. I am Neil Martin. Here are the headlines at the moment. In snap general elections in Barbados, after becoming the youngest republic in the world, Prime Minister Mia Mottley secured a second term in office. Her Labour Party won all 30 seats with a comprehensive supermajority in Parliament. According to Kev's Politics, Mottley will address the nation on Monday on her cabinet. A total of 108 candidates representing 7 parties and 9 independents competed for a seat in the House of Assembly. The Electoral and Boundaries Commission reported that just over 266,000 people were eligible to vote this January 19th. Brazil concluded 2021 with a record number of indebted families, according to a recent survey by the National Confederation of Commerce of Goods, Services and Tourism. The study revealed that 3 out of 4 Brazilian families, that is 75.6%, were indebted during the past year, representing the highest percentage since January 2010. Over a quarter of families, 26.1%, are in debt or behind with their bills, and 1 in 10 says they cannot pay their debts at all. Inflation in Brazil has reached 10.6 percentage points, the highest rate since 2015. The Israeli regime has demolished the home of another Palestinian family in the occupied East Jerusalem neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. The moves to oust Palestinians from their homes and install more Jewish settlers in East Jerusalem has sparked international condemnation. Opposition to the impending eviction of other families from the neighborhood in May last year was used by Israel as one of the excuses for its 11-day bombardment of the Gaza Strip. This Wednesday, Israeli police destroyed the home of the Salihia family, threatened with eviction since 2017. Hundreds of Palestinians face eviction from homes in Sheikh Jarrah and other East Jerusalem neighborhoods. Those are the headlines at the moment. For more content, check out our website, TeleSUR English. I am Leo Martin. Thanks for watching.
Pending response from the United States on its security proposal, Russia sends more troops to the border between Belarus and Ukraine for defensive military exercises. At the same time, the U.S. Secretary of State arrives in Ukraine to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky and announces the support and advance of NATO troops to the Russian border. At the same time, from the Kremlin, the presidency spokesman points out that the situation around Ukraine is very tense. In our critical move today, we analyze all of the details of this hot geopolitical scenario. Tatiana Perez will be today instead of Paolo Perez. Welcome. Let us begin. NATO and the United States maintain the narrative of an imminent attack by Russia on Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russia insists that it does not intend to attack anyone, but it does insist on the right to prepare to defend itself. Let's listen to some of the key players. The main task now is to avoid military attack against Ukraine, and that is exactly the reason why we're sending a very clear message to Russia. That if once again decides to use force against Ukraine, it will have a high cost for Russia, economic, political, or financial sanctions. NATO allies will also provide support to Ukraine. Ukraine has, of course, the right to self-defense, as does every sovereign nation. That is also the reason why we, since 2014, when Russia used force against Ukraine for the last time and invaded Donbass and eastern Ukraine, have implemented the biggest reinforcement for our collective defense with an increased NATO presence in the eastern part of the alliance. At the beginning of our meeting, I would like to thank you personally, President Biden and the U.S. administration, for your support, for your military assistance to Ukraine, and for increasing the assistance. We know that there are plans to further increase the force on a very short notice, and that gives President Putin the ability, also on very short notice, to take further aggressive action against Ukraine. I fervently hope that we can keep this on a diplomatic and peaceful path, but ultimately, that will be President Putin's decision. We are not threatening anyone, but we hear threats directed at us. We cannot accept demands related to military operations on our own territory. We had more information with our correspondent Oded Diaz from Moscow, Russia. Oded? Greetings, colleague. Thanks for the contact. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine are far from reaching a solution. Some might have thought that with conversations in Geneva between Moscow and Washington, this could have a big breakthrough. However, the North American representatives refused to accept Kremlin's demands about the fact that Ukraine would never ever become part of NATO, of the Atlantic Alliance. It is only sensitive to analyze how the growth of the arms race have been promoted in the Ukrainian territory from the White House. When the Maidan coup took place in February 2014, deposing the constitutional president Viktor Yanukovych, the U.S. provided $250 million, $50,000 million in military aid for the Ukrainians, plus $450 million only in 2021. Since 2014, the European Union added 217 million euros to Kiev's funds. Nevertheless, the West insists on telling the international community that the one and only responsible is Russia, who is supposedly planning a military intervention against Kiev, and have even tried to impose Moscow the prohibition to do military training within their own territory. In the meantime, the Atlantic Alliance already has 13,000 soldiers, 2,000 tanks, 400 APCs, and 3,000 airplanes and choppers stationed in West Europe. And there are currently 10,000 NATO instructors in Ukraine. Nonetheless, Moscow is preparing around 900 military exercises within its borders, 10% more than last year, beside others combined with Belarus process to happen between February 10 to 20. In the face of this escalate, as Russian authorities are sure every day to have all options on the table, political, technical, and military. However, they intend to solve the conflict through diplomacy in order not to engage in an armed confrontation which would surpass regional space and would become a global catastrophe. So far, some of the details about this issue. Now, coming back to the studio. Thank you, Odette. And this is part of what is at stake. That's why now we're reviewing the position of Russia and the United States regarding the tensions with Ukraine. Tensions between Russia and Ukraine are at the highest point in years, with Ukraine accusing Russia of trying to destabilize its territory and with an alleged military invasion for which it has presented no proof. The Kremlin denies it. It is planning an attack and argues that NATO support for Ukraine, including increased arms supplies and military training, constitutes a growing threat to its western flank. Kiev has fueled tensions in the east of the country and violated the Minsk agreements. Moscow also considers NATO's growing support for Ukraine in terms of weapons, training, and personnel a threat to its own security. Russian President Vladimir Putin said that the deployment of sophisticated NATO weapons in Ukraine, such as missile systems, would be crossing a red line for his country. Putin called for specific legal agreements that would exclude any further NATO expansion eastward and into Russian borders, saying the West failed to deliver on promised assurances. Kremlin's spokesman Dmitry Peskov claimed last December that the United States and all the NATO member states were already supplying weapons and military advisors to Ukraine. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that if the United States and NATO allies do not change course in Ukraine, Moscow has every right to choose how to ensure its legitimate security interests. Amidst all the tensions, the parties met in Geneva to seek a diplomatic solution to the conflict. However, the interference of the country of the North is evident, and the Secretary of State of the U.S., Antony Blinken, will make his first stop in Ukraine to meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky and his counterpart Dmitry Kuleba, showing imperial support for the conflicts involving Ukraine, which is nothing more than an attempt to attack Russia. The Foreign Minister of Russia and the Secretary of State of the U.S. agreed last Wednesday, January 18th, after a telephone conversation, that they need to meet in person. This will happen next Friday, January 21st, to discuss the situation in Ukraine and try to reduce tensions in the region. Let us geographically locate the Donbass, the Ukrainian region that was the scene of the armed conflict that broke out in 2014 and continues to be the focus of regional tension. Donbass, the keys to a conflict. Donbass, a word formed the expression Donetsk Basin, referring to the river running through this historical, cultural, and economic region, located to the east of Ukraine and near Russia, both countries of the Eurasian continent. The boundaries of the area have been defined, but it covers the Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast of Ukraine, as well as the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast of southern Russia. The Donbass was the historical border between the Sikh of Zaporozhye and the armies of the Don's Cossacks. Since the so-called mining boom in Soviet times, the Russian population in Donbass has reached more than half of the population. The figures speak of 72% to this day. Ukrainian-speaking Ukrainians remain in the rural district of the area, while in the cities many are Russian speakers who maintain strong ties with the neighboring country. By 2001, 74% of the population in the Donetsk Oblast spoke Russian, and only 24% spoke Ukrainian. The Donetsk Basin has been an important coal mining since the end of the 19th century, when the territory was industrialized. The local economy is dominated by coal mining and the metallurgical industry. Although annual extraction has declined since the 1970s, the Donbass remains an important supplier. Lignite mining is carried out at about 600 meters below the surface, while anthracite and bituminous coal mining is carried out at about 1,800 meters below the surface. In March 2014, in the wake of the so-called Euromaidan, large parts of the Donbass were involved in socio-political unrest that laid the groundwork for a dispute between a pro-Russian independence movement affiliated with the self-proclaimed People's Republic of Donetsk and Luhansk, and the so-called post-revolutionary government of Ukraine, supported by the West. By the way, the Western world has fabricated the version that Russia did not like the coup protests and, for that reason, invaded Ukrainian territories in revenge for the overthrow of President Viktor Yanukovych. Nothing could be more unfounded if we take into account the above data of the Russophone population both in Donbass and the Crimean Peninsula. Until the beginning of the ongoing conflict, the Donetsk Basin was the most populated of all Ukrainian regions, apart from the capital city of Kiev. Different facts for the analysis today in Critical Move. Russia-Ukraine tensions. Here we have the question of today's Critical Move. Russia-Ukraine tensions, geopolitical implications. Is this a conflict orchestrated by the United States? Who wins? Who loses? Where are we looking forward to this opinion? That's why we return to Critical Move. Today's topic, Russia-Ukraine tensions, geopolitical implications. We start with the analysis right away. So we have today Daniel Loato, international political analyst, specialist in the Middle East and Near East from Spain. Daniel, welcome. How are you? Good afternoon. How are you? Good afternoon, Tatiana. Very thankful for your contact and greetings to the whole team. So in this part of the analysis, I would like to focus on some circumstantial issues that make the situation of the part of the world clearer for us to understand what's happening there in our geopolitical analysis. First, the arrival of Antony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State to Ukraine. He already met with the president and is expecting to meet with his homologue, Ukrainian foreign minister. Can you hear me, Daniel? Sorry, I lost audio. Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear you now. So we want to discuss circumstantial facts. The arrival today of the official visit by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Ukraine. Well, really, there is not much to say about Antony Blinken, not even about his latest statements in the last couple of weeks. Really, the level and the diplomacy, the North American policy, and that of Europe is very low. We have to remember that Russia proposed a treaty a month ago on December, which is already on the web from the Foreign Relations Ministry of Russia, and they have not received any answer from the Americans. They say that for next month they will have an answer. So not even the Western audiences know about this treaty for pacification and denuclearization of Europe. So what Blinken has done in the last couple of days is to feed the arms grid of the United States. So he's confirming that Ukraine and Georgia are going to be members of NATO. The Secretary General Stoltenberg have said this, and this is something they are discussing since 2008. So this aggression continues. But Daniel, just notice that this is a new rhetoric in the last couple of days. Is it one of the same or a strategy to confuse? Upon his arrival, he said, I honestly hope we continue through the diplomatic and pacific way. So this is a kind of diplomatic rhetoric that is hollow, like in the conversation with Iran. It's totally hollow. It's a rhetoric they use for the crimes against Palestine by Israel. So they have in NATO instructors and U.S. instructors training the Ukrainian army in the use of nuclear weapons, and they're training military Ukrainian. And so they're probably turning the Russian border in a center of missiles. Similar to that in the time they deployed missiles in Cuba, and we almost were at the brink of the Third World War, and now the U.S. is doing exactly the same. Is nuclearizing and expanding this organization. This is not a criminal organization. This is a military organization that was born in 1949 against the Soviet Union and the Allied countries. They had the opportunity when the Warsaw Pact was dissolved to dissolve this organization, and this to achieve a framework of demilitarizing Europe and having achieve more peace. And so they're surrounding Russia in the borders. And so they're looking for the nuclearization of Ukraine, which is inadmissible for Russia's security. This is the discourse, the Lincoln discourse, which is totally hollow. So they're already pending, waiting for a response. And this security proposal by Moscow. So we're going to add Hernan Banques to the analysis, international analyst, members of the ALBA's Continental Secretary, ALBA's Movimientos from Venezuela. How are you? Greetings to you and to all the audience. So I was telling our guests and our audience that we're just considering all of the facts, and then we're going to the rest of the details. So Volodymyr Zelensky have said that they're going to strengthen their commercial relations with the United States, and they are having more weapons, and they are thankful for this. So this is in regards to the proposal by Russia to increase the security in Europe. What's your input? So we already identified in December last year. This is relaunch of the Cold War by the United States. And they're trying to recompose their hegemony, the world hegemony. And in this context, Ukraine is one of the spaces for this struggle, for this fight. Like Hong Kong. So Ukraine is part of this battle from the United States. And they're trying to rebuild their control in Europe, They want to advance in their attack to Russia, and they want to put in check some of their Russia's positions. And as we have discussed any other times, so they're going to rebuild, serving their interests and those of the regional interests and political interests in the area. So Ukraine they're trying to follow the United States. So another point to stand out, to highlight. So Emmanuel Macron, President of France, said, besides we're mentioning other actors, Macron says, in the next week, we will propose the reestablishment of order in terms of stability in Europe. So are the United States going to respond, after France and Germany say what they think about that? So the U.S. has turned all Europe, and Europe has become into a pet of the United States, sort of pet from the United States. And they're following the script that the West and the Pentagon is providing them. So in this attack from the United States to maintain their hegemony in Europe, this is a multi-dimensional attack. We have the Middle East as well. So the United States is thousands away across the continent. They're trying to fragment Europe and also fragment the relations to Russia and China. So they almost did it in the 1990s. Also, we saw that in the Kazakhstan attempt, also in the Middle East in the last decades. So this is not working so well for the U.S. But in Europe, they did get it. So Europe is in a crossroads, because if they continue being as the poodle of the U.S., Russia and China might put the European continent on their knees in a very fast way. So in winter, with the lack of supplies, of gas supplies, so the foreign minister of Germany, if they say there is an imminent invasion by Russia, then this Nord Stream 2 could be blocked. Of course, but we all know the difficulties, the growing difficulties there are with the gas supplies and carburants, because there is a lack of that, especially in Europe. So we have a large dependency of this gas. And also China with the earth metals, rare metals, and China has a large supply of these, and they can close the market for this. So the Russian president and the Chinese president, well, Germany and France are in a position to continue developing the United States script that Russia is going to invade Ukraine. Something different is that Russia can attack Ukraine at some point if they are threatened. So this is not going to depend on the conversations with the United States or of possible Russian actions. This is going to depend on the Russian own concept of security. So they're not going to hand themselves to an eternal conversations, mediating conversations. This is going to be determined by their own perception of their own security. So there's already a red line, and for the first time in 25 years, Russia has set the red line. So Russia's document talks clearly about the denuclearization of the European territory, something that should matter and should care for Europe, that Europe is a denuclearized territory. So Russia's proposal is that they withdraw all nuclear weapons from Europe, including the U.S., including those that the U.S. has deployed. This is, of course, of interest of the European nation population, but they don't know about this. So U.S. and NATO are training the Ukrainian forces, and they are also training them in the use of nuclear weapons. Of course, if your neighbor is hostile and is deploying all of their aggressiveness and warfare industry next to you, of course, Russia is taking actions for its defense. But the NATO is stating this as an invasion. This is a country narrative. So any part of the world, including Europe, because those affected the most in case of an army confrontation are the ones in Europe. So another point, important point, the Russian government, two different representatives are talking about military exercises in Donbass, in their own territory, in their frontiers with Belarus and Ukraine. Is this a test to their strength, or is this a warning? So I'd like to insist, besides what my colleague was saying, this is a parallel scenarios in which the United States is disputing its hegemony. So in different moments, China has had to prove tests, do some strength tests to make sure to prove it. This is a preventive action from Russia to test strength, these military training exercises. And so the territories are in dispute. In the case of Nord Stream, Germany and France are the kind of countries that are protecting very much their relations to the United States and their global agenda in the West. But at the same time, they have to protect their economic interests. So this has to do with generating more better conditions for the Nord Stream 2, which is the most economic choice for Europe. So we're talking about the whole Europe needing this with the profound energetic crisis. So we are in the critical move, analyzing tensions, Ukraine, Russia, and their geopolitical implications. In the screen, we repeat the question. There it is. Is it about a conflict orchestrated by the United States? Who wins, who loses? Looking forward to your opinion. We're back. Let us review the strategic claims of those involved in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. With a pro-Eurocentric president, the course of Ukraine is uncertain due to the fact that one of the characters that seems to be permanently fueling the flares of conflict, Volodymyr Zelensky, has surrendered to the European Union and the United States, requesting support to modernize the military structure of his country, a request that is accompanied by a tactical move by NATO with the intention of making Kiev part of this pro-war organization and intends to use the country as an aircraft carrier for unclear purposes within the Russian-Ukrainian border. The escalation of conflict between Kiev and Moscow is undoubtedly a move by the alliance to undermine the border under the pretext of protecting the Slavic country from a possible invasion by Russia. Under this excuse and taking advantage of President Zelensky's approach, NATO, headed by the United States, has taken the decision to ignore the Minsk Accords and the security guarantees expressed by the Russian government in meetings held. At the recent meeting between Russia and NATO and the United States, Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryakov said, "We explained why it is absolutely imperative to obtain legal guarantees for NATO's non-expansion. Why is it imperative that we obtain legal guarantees against the deployment near Russian border of strike forces that could hit targets on our territory? And why we raise the issue of the NATO largely withdrawing from the material investment of the territories of the states that joined NATO after 1997. For these reasons, restoring a peace atmosphere and frank dialogue seems to be interrupted by the appetites of the United States to use the organization and countries such as Ukraine as source of a geostrategic imbalance for their own benefit." So these are more facts that continue adding to the analysis. Here we have Daniel Lobato, international analyst, and Hernan Vargas, also member of the Albert Continental Secretariat. Daniel, Minsk agreements. Why were there only on paper? Between 2014 and 2015, Western powers and Ukraine, they tried to put an end to this Donbas conflict that already had 13,000 deaths. Why was it not practical? What hasn't been applied? Because we've discussed this. The engine, the unfulfillment of these agreements by the United States, the rules of the game that would not allow them to maintain their hegemony do not work for them. This is in their conversations to Iran in their international court with the massacres in Afghanistan. So the rules of the game to maintain hegemony, they have to take it off the board. And in this dynamic we've spoken before, to balkanize the borders of Russia and China, in the also neo-Nazi regimes like the Ukrainian one, so that they could place tactical nuclear missiles in there. So there is a second factor that Russia would not forget, which is an engine for the whole West. That is a weird phrase, we're not sure who said it, that Siberia is too big and rich to be only from Russia. This is a global goal of stopping the growth of Russia and China. And the second goal is in that Russia of Boris Yeltsin, when Russia was on sale, and this Russia from 100 years ago, in which the West powers were there, their territory, the armies were in the territory with a great risk of this Russian security. That possibility that the Russian resources end up being plundered by the West. So, Daniel, I beg your pardon. We wonder and think what it should be unthinkable. Would this be the scenario for a new war, Biden? Each president of the United States has a war, or with the intensification of other wars, like Obama's case. So a former colonel of the United States acknowledged recently, so the military consortium is the one dominating the White House. So regardless who is in power and who has the presidency of the United States, Obama, Biden, Trump. So Trump did not start any war, but it bombarded Syria, also maintained Afghanistan until their withdrawal from there. So at the end, this is a military consortium, transnational consortium that dominates the American policy. And within the United States, there is a serious problem. Biden has lost popularity. He's like an useless manager. They lost many lives last year. and they had millions of lives, and in China had only dozens of lives lost during the pandemic. Besides, the Vice President Kamala Harris is like a parling doll. In the last interviews, she has shown no capacity of analyzing what's going on around the world, even less what's going on in the U.S. And that's why Hillary Clinton has presented herself for office next term. So the United States policy is even weaker every time, and so this industrial arms is what is moving the engine. This Rams Corporation, this is an advisor to the White House. In 2019, they wrote exactly the roadmap that the United States is taking right now. They wrote, 1, they should provide with lethal weapons to Ukraine. Also, they should provide weapons for the rebels. Let's call these terrorists in this container maintained by the West, and then they are exported to other countries in the world. It's Libya, Kazakhstan. They said that they had to promote a revolution in Belarus and Ukraine, that they had to feed in the Caucasus the Russian witness, that they had to promote revolts in central Russia. This happened a week ago. So this is a militarist lobbyist. And what happens in the presidency at every time. So this is what they're doing by the letter. So Hernan, on the role played by the Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, is this an excuse? Is this the puppet used by the United States? I think, without a doubt, as there have been a progressive position of Zelensky's figure. On one side, Europe promoting NATO, and on the other, the U.S. agenda. So this is an operator that works between their national oligarch interests, that they say the United States is sending weapons and military training, and also the possibilities for secession in Ukraine. And he works on the behalf of the interests of the oligarchs. And most of the internal conflicts has to do with the tight control of the oligarchs in the national policy, which they have been trying to translate as corruption, but this is a dominance of the oligarchs in Ukraine and together with the West forces. This is a proxy from the international interests and those in the region. So I'd like to ask, it's a security proposal by Russia, which has not received any response. So the new expansion of NATO, so not in, so returning. So this seems the inclusion, the inclusion of Ukraine to NATO and not moving forward to the Russian borders. This has to do with other powers involved, U.S., NATO. Is it possible to de-escalate this conflict? So from the Venezuelan perspective, this tension is promoted towards, promoting peace. So nobody wants an arms confrontation, and there is a solution of conflict with both parties. So there should be, they should achieve a regional balance of Europe, especially because Europe, they should agree with Russia on how to handle this conflict. So this is a scenario that is not favorable to the current agenda of the United States, which is worsened. In December last year, the U.S. passed an executive action which has to do with the destruction of the democracy in some areas. So they need to prevent China and Russia's economy to go further and to undermine their power. So they need to undermine their geopolitical space. This is a clear agenda, but we should trust that in this scenario, Russia is defining a defense strategy that is sensible. So they're defending Europe's interests, the issue of the gas. Ukraine is a passage of many pipelines to Europe. And of course, this is a geopolitical scenario that is not convenient for Europe to have a military confrontation in here. It's at risk. Their supply of gas is at risk. Economically speaking, the solution of the conflict should be towards more levels of sovereignty to this nation. So Daniel, about this. So Russia has been expecting a response for the treaty they proposed for a month now. And so this United States is trying to maintain their hegemony in the Euro-Asian continent. But this Russian proposal should be of interest mainly to the Europeans. It is a proposal that has been hidden to the European audience until under this media anesthesia. They start with the basic point that none of the signing parts will take actions that put in danger the security of the other party. And this is a basic. Another point is that not the increase of NATO's members. So they already announced that Georgia and Ukraine will be part of these of the members of NATO. So they've been saying this about there is no excuse for an aggressive organization. So since the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, we have to remember the aggression to Yugoslavia, to Syria, to Afghanistan. They have provoked 40 million refugees in the world, and they have caused a humanitarian crisis. Also in Yemen. So a treaty like Russia's treaty, which implies a pacification of the region, in one region that has suffered 2 world wars, and the population in Europe doesn't know about this treaty proposed by Russia, and they follow the U.S. information. And this is very serious, this submissive participation of Europe. So what France has said, and the position by Germany, and the silence by the European press, accusing systematically to Russia. So everything we have analyzed for an hour, is it possible that this moment between Russia and this tension between Russia, Ukraine, and the U.S. will escalate? I think this is very difficult. Russia has set the red line. I think the U.S. is not going to respond positively to some of Russia's proposals. They will try to stall this treaty, and maybe in a few weeks there might be an act of false flag. Maybe citizens from the eastern part of Donbass with Russian passport and Russian nationality might die for due to some action. Maybe they want to desire to restore the Ukrainian integrity in the Donbass area or in the Crimea. There should be an answer from Russia. So Russia's ultimatum is not only to the U.S., it's also an ultimatum to Russia itself, because it is binded to this ultimatum. So they are not doing this Ukraine. This is not going to be a second Afghanistan, which is what the United States wants. This is not going to happen, but it could. There could be a deployment of missiles to Stalingrad, to Belarus, or maybe a tactical attack with missiles, like the U.S. has done in other areas, Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya. This kind of tactical bombardment, and they might try to attack some facilities. So to conclude, your opinion about this. Do you share Daniel's opinion? Is it the probability of war, despite what Antony Blinken says, that the diplomacy will remain and the dialogue? Next 21st, Russia's Foreign Minister will meet with Blinken. So Daniel has stated some key arguments. I think there are some points in which Russia is not going to give in. U.S. is not going to give in their agenda. I think looking at different moments of this war escalade, I would dare say that the first inflection point, if the conflict will be in the Middle East and not in Europe, then the possibilities of escalation will be higher. But I don't think it would present in an armed conflict in Europe, due to the logic of the central control, imperial control, which is easier for them to create open wars in Middle East and not in Europe. I think this is going to be a point that will prevent the escalation of this. So Germany and France and other countries of the world will have to choose a way out that does not include an army confrontation. So I come back with the issue of the gas pipeline. Europe would not allow an energy crisis, economic crisis from an armed conflict in Ukraine, beyond the geopolitical interests that are involved in this. I think there will be favorable scenarios for negotiations that would help them be, in a better position in this conflict. This is a very comfortable scenario because it's hundreds of miles away from North America. Thank you, Hernan. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, all. Daniel, thank you very much. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you for joining us. Please continue with us in TeleSUR.
What's his name? George Floyd!
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
We are approaching a new era. Technology trends and the massive deployment of new networks. It is just the beginning of what lies ahead in this new decade. Atomon. Travelers of knowledge, the future is today.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on TeleSUR.
The story goes, you're gonna make it if you try, and if you don't, may your life waste away, 'cause it's your fault. Like the sheen of a rotting fish, the glitter just dazzles. For everyone who's filthy rich, a million must suffer. So start your climb up the money tree. The best slaves are those who think they're free. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. As life unfolds, people struggle to make ends meet. Look around, what you see, the hunger, the homeless, the powerless streets. On your mind, the need for change. Channel your pain and your rage. Stand up and link your arms for strength. Shout it out to the police state. I can't breathe, that's why I take a knee. Won't take you for slavery. Oh, say, can you see Rome is burning? Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Oh, how it burns. Oh, I feel the burn. Make no mistake, racism starts with the state to divide and rule the working class, to keep us broken, not building anew. Lessons of history revealed, organize or be displaced. The rulers have no solutions, only violence, wars and jails. Stick together and fight for your just claims. Workers
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR. Every year, thousands of people leave their homeland to reach new horizons. A reality of those people who struggle for their freedom. Know the diverse causes of those who live between borders. Thursdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
What's his name? Joyful!
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South. Weekdays. Only on TeleSUR.
It is our duty to reverse the damage we cause to the planet. Let's recover our natural ecosystems with actions in defense of the environment. Let's keep fighting for a greener world. Wednesdays, only on TeleSUR.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Sean todos muy bienvenidos a Vidas. Hay lugares donde el arte se unifica con el orgullo de los pueblos. Y esos lugares están llenos de colores, alegría, pasión, tradiciones, arraigo, valor y entrega.
Real Life. Fridays. Only on TeleSUR.
Hi, you're watching TeleSUR English. I am Leo Martin. Here are the headlines at the moment. In snap general elections in Barbados, after becoming the youngest republic in the world, Prime Minister Mia Mottley secured a second term in office. Her Labour Party won all 30 seats with a comprehensive supermajority in Parliament. According to Geopolitical, Mottley will address the nation on Monday on her cabinet. A total of 108 candidates representing 7 parties and 9 independents competed for a seat in the House of Assembly. The Electoral and Boundaries Commission reported that just over 266,000 people were eligible to vote this January 19th. New setback for Joe Biden's administration. The electoral reform proposed by the President of the United States was defeated this Wednesday in the Senate due to the unanimous rejection by Republican opposition and the divisions within his own party. The Democrats were unable to push two bills already approved by the House of Representatives and declined to activate a special procedure that would allow them to submit both texts to a vote in the upper house despite the opposition's rejection. The bill would have guaranteed the right to early voting and vote by mail, in addition to establishing Election Day as a national holiday. It would also allow the Justice Department to oversee any changes made to election laws in states that have a history of discrimination against racial minorities. On Thursday, at least 2 people were reported dead and 22 injured by a bomb in Lahore, Pakistan. A bomb blast in a shopping district of Lahore killed 2 people and injured 22, according to police officials and hospital sources. 1 child was among the victims. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, although since August's takeover by the Taliban, a series of blasts and attacks against authorities have been carried out as a truce between the Pakistani government and the Taliban expired. Late last year's aggressions were claimed by Tehreek-e-Taliban, a local movement that has been suspected of ties to the Afghan Taliban. Those are the headlines at the moment. For more content, check our website, TeleSUR English. I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.
Good evening and welcome to the world today. We're going to discuss Turkey, which is in a critical state on many levels. First, we have a government in Turkey, led of course by President Erdogan and the AKP, which has been in power now for many years, and which, when it first came to power, was welcomed extremely enthusiastically by the United States, by Britain, by the financial press, the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, as a model Islamist government and something that could be imitated in Egypt, in Tunisia. These were NATO's favorite Islamists. They could do no wrong. They were supposed to be modernizers, reformers. Of course, this was largely an illusion that this was going to be a liberal reforming government, as many thought abroad or wanted to think. And some liberals in Turkey also had hopes, which were ended very rapidly. In fact, there was never an age where Erdogan was too different from what he is now. He was cleverer. He was maneuvering in a slightly different world. And most importantly, he was a believer in neoliberal economics and all that that implied, and he was a staunch supporter of US foreign policy. Over the last 2 years, we have seen a massive outbreak of repression in Turkey. Against who? Against the usual people, starting off with the Kurdish population of that country, with religious minorities, with left-wing progressive intellectuals, with anyone who opens their mouth to question the verity.
But I think the problem is bigger. The Turkish establishment in general is trying to deal with a
much bigger regional crisis, whatever is happening in the Middle East since the so-called Arab Spring. One big challenge is the fact that the Kurds now do exist. The world is recognizing them out of the debris of the political systems in the Middle East, in Iraq, in Syria, and in Turkey. The Kurds are emerging as crucial political actors, and unfortunately, the Turkish establishment as a whole, by which I mean Erdogan and his allies, multiple allies, all of them ultranationalists and decisively anti-Kurdish, highly militaristic, highly racist people who came together, and they are trying to restructure the Turkish state apparatus in highly nationalist ways. And when they are doing this, anybody who has any kind of critical ideas about what they are doing, how they are reshaping Turkish society and politics, they are of course the target. I myself have 3 court cases, 2 arrest warrants, and I may go to prison when I go back to Turkey actually. Many of my friends are like this. Currently, our co-chairs, 7 other deputies are already in prison. 6 of our deputies, they lost their parliamentary mandate. 14 others were sentenced, and if those sentences are approved by the Court of Appeals, they will go to prison and lose their mandate. I myself may go to prison. Anytime anybody can go to prison because, as I said, it's kind of a state of nature, no rule of law there, and complete destruction of the separation of powers. But still, there is a very strong opposition to Erdogan, and we are optimistic that we can stop the political direction of the country in 2019.
Turkey is, of course, a staunch member of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. For many, many decades, it has been a pillar of NATO in that region and beyond. And yet the coverage of this repression in the Western media today, I mean, I look at many European papers and American papers regularly, it's been very muted. Of course, some papers have been critical, but compared to what these newspapers would write if Turkey was not a member of NATO or even a mildly hostile state, the coverage is pretty shocking. I mean, the scale of the repression is not talked about, and the authoritarian nature of the regime. Of course, one reason we know is that they have paid him billions to keep the refugees there. I mean, he's been paid off, and because they do these deals with him, the European Union, they refuse to be too critical. But from what you describe and what other colleagues in Turkey have described from within the media, journalists put into prison, editors locked up, professors stopped from teaching because they're not regarded as reliable and referred to as anti-state elements.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a classic authoritarian model.
Yeah, I think so. There are 2 things here. One is Erdogan is personally trying to survive. He's pretty much isolated, he's cornered, both at home and abroad, and he made alliances with so many other sectors, all of them ultranationalists. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One is, for example, the former chief of police, who even stayed in prison for doing illegal things, and he always brags about how many Kurds he killed during the 90s. So now he is a good ally of Erdogan. One is the leader of the Nationalist Party, the ultra-nationalist party. Certain sectors within the army who are quite nationalistic. So, and for these people, what is happening in Syria is an existential issue for Turkey, like the Kurds gaining an autonomous kind of status in Syria is unfortunately perceived by these Turkish elites as a national security threat.
Because they argue it encourages the Kurds in eastern Turkey.
Which is, I mean, 60% of the Kurds who live in the Middle East, they live within Turkey's borders. So that is the biggest the Kurdish population there. Iraqi Kurds already, they have almost a confederal system there. So the Kurds in Syria are developing their own kind of administrative model. And of course there will be repercussions in Turkey. That is for sure. But how do you respond to this situation where Kurds are emerging as a regional actor? They do exist. Either you are going to kill them all, and for now it seems that what Erdogan is thinking, he would destroy, all the Kurdish towns, both in Turkey and outside, if he can. But the international and local conjuncture, the regional conjuncture, is not allowing Erdogan to do this. Or we think, and this is our proposal, rather than perceiving the Kurds as a national security threat, Erdogan can take it as an opportunity and re-engage the Kurds on friendly terms. So, which means he can have better relations with the Kurds in Syria and take them as partners. And also that may help to resume the peace process at home in Turkey, which was in effect between 2013 and 2015, which Erdogan suspended right after we entered the parliament. I do think that he is also under a lot of pressure of the certain sectors within the army and all these ultranational circles, because the fact is that there is not much that unites. There is not kind of a coherent ideology that unites these members of this new alliance, the Nationalist Front. The only thing that they have in common is being enemies of the Kurds. So that is why this strong dose of anti-Kurdish nationalistic discourse, both in Turkey and also in Syria.
But Hishar, you leave one big question out of the equation, which is that whatever the situation is locally and whatever the relationship of forces, the big player on the global stage is the United States of America. So what the United States decides, for whatever reason, and their reasons change, they change allies, is quite critical. I mean, if they wanted to, normally when they don't like a country or a country is doing which they feel is against their interest, they sanction it. They put sanctions against Iran, against Venezuela, against Russia, whatever. They're capable of doing that. Against Turkey, nothing so far, because it's a member of NATO, which is a huge contradiction for the European Union at the moment and for the United States. So how do you think the United States is going to react?
So of course the Americans, they do have their own political agenda in Syria and in Iraq, but they don't really know much about what to do with Turkey, because yes, Turkey is a member of the NATO, but they can't work with Erdogan. In fact, last year there were a couple of sanctions, for example, visa applications to the US from Turkey. They were suspended for some time, and the US very recently, they also declared Turkey to be a place, and a not so good place for touristic destination. In Syria though, Americans too they don't have many options other than working with the Kurds. I mean, they can't work with Assad, they can't work with ISIS, they can't work with the former, the so-called Free Syrian Army, because they worked with them and they failed, they couldn't. So now Turkey is somehow mobilizing those Free Syrian Army elements, not against Assad, but against the Kurds. So the strange thing here is, particularly for those who are on the left of the political spectrum. So this movement, the Kurdish movement in Syria, is left-leaning, even anarchist in certain respects, highly progressive force with women, men, and they have proved to be quite a hope-giving kind of movement in the Middle East. Ideologically, they are strongly opposed to what they call capitalistic modernity, but then practically speaking, there is an alliance with the United States. And of course, the Kurds are mature enough to see that, I mean, Americans, they can sell anybody, anytime, sell out, which they did. I mean, in Iraq, they did, not once, several times. And here in Syria, at one point, they may say that America still thinks of Turkey as the regional ally, but then the local ally in Syria is the Kurds. So imagine, you put yourself into the place of Americans. So your regional and local ally are at war. If you think of, for example, Russians, they have their regional ally, which is Iran, and they have very good relations with Assad, the local ally there, despite the fact that Turkey is a member of the NATO. But the reality on the ground requires them to work with the Kurds.
Because all their own forces had failed.
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, at first they started working with the Free Syrian army, which was supported by Turkey, but somehow it didn't work. Their priorities changed. Americans no longer were concerned with kind of destroying Assad, but Turkey insisted on that. I mean, if the Americans are now working with the Kurds, it's not America's choice. It is Turkey's kind of failures. The one thing why both Europeans and Americans are still somehow supporting Turkey, not Erdogan. I mean, imagine there were 3 million refugees who left Syria and there was Brexit here. And the political chemistry of European politics changed. So many racist political parties, they became powerful. Imagine if there is more chaos in Turkey and so many people, millions of people, maybe 10 millions of people are pouring into European countries. That will be maybe the end of European Union. So despite the fact that they do have a lot of problems with Erdogan that we know of, but still
they don't want to destabilize.
They don't want to destabilize Turkey. Not that I think Europeans or the West in general, they like Erdogan. They are very much disappointed at him. But at the same time, he's ruling the country. They have to engage him in one way or another.
If he cannot neutralize or destroy Kurdish autonomy in Syria, what is officially within Syrian borders, he will see this as a defeat, because obviously an autonomous region in Syria offers an example both for the Turkish Kurds and others, but mainly the Turkish Kurds, which are the largest Kurdish community. I mean, people learn through their experiences.
Yeah.
And so the Kurdish people in Turkey naturally will say, we want the same rights. And why not?
We already want it.
Exactly. Yeah. Why not? Yeah. So to resist that is not going to be possible. The only language Erdogan is using at the moment is destroy anything that seems attractive as a model to the Kurds in Turkey. And recently, one of his ministers, I think, said the West shouldn't forget that we placed tens of thousands of troops in Cyprus, even though they didn't want us to. I think they did want them to. Kissinger supported that Turkish move. So this thing they acted against the West is nonsense. They acted with the support of the West. But they're reminding people, we can do these things. We don't care if you don't like it or call us pariahs. But is it going to be that easy? What would be the consequences if Erdogan did go cross the Syrian frontier and crush them?
I see. Actually, today we got the news that the Turkish attack on Afrin, the city of Afrin, officially started. There were some airstrikes too. We still don't know whether the Syrian airspace was used or not, whether the Russians gave the permission or not, but probably using the Turkish airspace, but from there attacking some Kurdish positions in Syria. It started. To what extent he can really take this fight? So I think, I mean, like Syria is not even Iraq or Egypt or any other country in the Middle East. Syria is, I think, very unique. It was one of the rare places where the Cold War still was continuing, for example. And it's not a coincidence that, I mean, Russians, Americans, Israel, Turkey, Iran, Saudi, every single regional and global force is already involved. Why? Because it may be a bold statement, but I think the political future of Syria would be kind of a summary, a microcosm of the political future of the Middle East, because it is kind of cross-cutting almost every single major problem that have shaped the political kind of map in the Middle East. It is related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the Turkish-Kurdish conflict, plus the Shia-Sunni kind of conflict. Pretty much it's at the center of that. So Erdogan may have these ambitions, but then there is Iran, there is, of course, Americans, Russia. Somehow they are trying to kind of reduce his anxiety, maybe giving him even a fake victory so that he can manipulate at home in the run-up to the elections. Americans are not happy with Turkey's aggression. But Erdogan, at home, given the decline of economy, so many problems at home, total instability in every respect. He needs some strong dose of nationalism and maybe some fake victory so that he can use that at home. I think what Erdogan is doing is in vain. He's going to fail and fail so badly, but he's just trying to gain some time until 2019. He is manipulating almost every anti-Kurdish sentiment in order the ultra-nationalist social base that he has and his allies. We are in the war against terrorists, enemies. We are all surrounded with external, internal enemies. And the sad thing is, it almost always it works. Somehow, people, gather around these, populist, nationalistic demagogues. We will see, but there will be a lot of resistance from the Kurds. There may be another kind of experience like Kobane, what happened in Kobane. The Kurdish people will be resisting Erdogan. And although Erdogan is looking after kind of a victory in Afrin, Afrin may politically turn into his own grave, his cemetery.
The repression against communities in Turkey carried out by Erdogan, the destruction of cities, the destruction historic center of Diyarbakir, which I remember visiting some years ago. I mean, this is worse than what was carried out before by previous Turkish governments.
Definitely.
It's much worse. I mean, they did horrific things. We know what they did. Destroyed the ability of the Kurdish people, or tried to speak their own language, tried to destroy their culture, kept them completely marginalized, and insisted that we were all equal citizens of a republic, when in fact, of course, the Kurdish people weren't considered equal. That has now been taken further by Erdogan.
It is a process of what I call a violent recolonization of Kurdish territory. Tanks and airstrikes to destroy Kurdish towns. I mean, this happens. I mean, this is a crime against humanity. You can't do that. You can't use tanks in civilian settlements, particularly in your own country. That is what happened. Like the city of Shirnak, 70% of the city was destroyed. It doesn't exist. All the buildings were bulldozed and destroyed. About 2,000 people were killed. 800 of them were civilians. And now the UN, actually, the rapporteur on human rights, a representative on human rights, they're working on cases. So many atrocities were committed there. So here is, I mean, whether President Erdogan alone did that, that is the other strange thing. Those people who destroyed all of those towns, many of them are in prison, actually. They were also a part of
the coup.
Yeah. Those who destroyed, in particular, Sur, Jizre, and Nusayrin, the most destruction happened in this street.
Torture, rape. This was happening to a country not so far from Europe, and by and large the European Union leaders remained silent. There was no big assault, even verbally, from the European Union leadership on this relation.
Honestly, I have had a lot of debates with them, and always say we are concerned about the developments in Turkey. So, and in Twitter I read a line by some guy who wrote, "I am concerned about the concerns of European Union when bad things happen to Turkey." Right? So the European Union doesn't have a policy on Turkey and the Kurds. I mean, there are 28 member states and they don't agree on any single point. That's their problem.
Let's be serious about the European Union. When we talk about the European Union, it's not the tiny state, it's the Germans, the French, and the British, and behind them the United States.
Yeah, I think two things. I mean, the so-called refugee crisis was a huge thing for Europeans. They were scared of Erdogan threatening to ship all of them to Europe. They were really scared. Yes, they bribed him. They gave all the money, please keep your refugees there. But definitely you are right. I mean, there was no strong reaction to a candidate country which is trying to to be a member of the European Union, destroying all those Kurdish towns, committing crimes against humanity. Europeans mostly, unfortunately, they remain silent. Not that they approved it, but when we talk to them, many of them, yeah, we see that. We understand Erdogan is a monster. In fact, many European politicians, high-ranking bureaucrats I talked to, they likened Erdogan to Hitler of 1930s. They would give me examples, like he is doing that exactly Hitler did that in 1930s. Not that they don't know about it.
They know about it.
They know about it. This is cynicism. The problem is that they are doing it despite the fact that they know about it. Mostly saying that we have refugee crisis, we have migration issues, we have economic interests, we have this. I mean, the discourse of democracy and human rights in Europe is totally bankrupt, totally corrupt.
Tell me something in conclusion. From what we've been discussing, you seem quite optimistic that Erdogan can't carry on indefinitely, that sooner or later, so you are optimistic on that level.
I think we are going to survive Erdogan. We are a people. He is a person. People always survive persons, even if they can be very, very strong. That is one thing. Second, Erdogan is not able to stabilize the country politically, economically, socially. But for 10 years, from 2002 up until 2011 and 12, Erdogan stabilized the country. Living standards somehow increased, all right?
So did corruption, by the way.
Of course. I mean, they go together.
And
they go together.
Himself, his family, his associates grew very rich.
Exactly. But Erdogan created a society that is demanding more and more, really. But he's not able to satisfy their demands. I think that is the major challenge, because middle classes, all the liberal people, even left-leaning people, you would remember in 2007, 8, 9, people were supporting Erdogan. He was the good guy who was trying to defeat the authoritarian state. And, you know, many liberals, leftists, Kurds, all of them, they were supportive of Erdogan. Yes, Erdogan created
an illusion.
He created an illusion, but he really killed the father, the sovereign, the old state, as the elder brother who was delivering justice, right? We like elder brothers, but we never like angry fathers, because people don't want polarization. They want a stable economy. They want to see what's going to happen in the coming few months. Honestly, now, nobody knows what's going to happen in Turkey next week, including the AKP people who are in power now. So that is why I think people are overwhelmed. They are